Good morning, everybody. You're all very welcome to the press conference announcing the results of the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality. In just a moment, I'll hand you over to the chair, Catherine Day. But just before we do that, I'll say to any media or journalists in attendance, Catherine is available for questions and to take your questions after the presentation. So if you do have a question, we'd ask you to type your name and your publication in the Q&A function on Zoom, and we will come to you at the end of the presentation. So I'll now hand you over to the Chair of the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality, Catherine Day.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the closing ceremony for the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality. I want to welcome the members of the Assembly, their families and friends, and everyone who worked with us towards this day since we started work in January 2020. We're also delighted to have with us many of the speakers and panelists and the advocacy groups that participated in the Assembly, together with members of the Oireachtas and the media. Before we share the recommendations voted by the Assembly, I'd like to say a little bit about it. Ireland is making quite an impact in producing citizens' assemblies which help to deliver far-reaching social change. This kind of citizen involvement is rapidly becoming part of the way Ireland decides on its future direction. And we see the Assembly on Gender Equality as part of that process of helping modern Ireland change for the better. Now, you may be curious about what actually happens in an assembly. If you live with or know any of our members, you may have wondered what has been occupying so much of their time in recent months. Why did they lock themselves away in a quiet room to participate in long Zoom meetings? We're going to show you a short video now to tell the story of our journey together in the words of some of our members.
Well, I think it was a Tuesday afternoon, early in January, and there was a knock at the door.
I never answer the door. My husband is the doorman.
So it was really very random, a Sunday afternoon, I think.
And there was a bearded gentleman there at the door.
And he asked me if I had heard of the Citizens' Assembly and would I be interested in serving on it.
And I said, okay.
The Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality was established to advance gender equality, to make proposals so that gender equality becomes the norm in the Ireland of tomorrow. There is a widespread feeling that the advance of gender equality has stalled in the last 10 years and that it's high time to get it moving again.
I kind of thought this will be very interesting and it will be something, as a citizen, I thought I'd like to do. So I was excited about it, yeah, I was.
I want to make this country better for my child. I want her to have more opportunities.
Well, we had the first meeting in Dublin Castle in January 2020. I found it an inspiring meeting. At that stage, our aim was to open up the issues, get people thinking about them, and then in the discussion groups they started talking about, well, does society have to be like that? Why do we think like that? And we thought it would go on like that for the next 6 months until COVID hit.
COVID landed really with a bang, and I was concerned, that it wouldn't continue, and that it was a lost opportunity.
So then when I got a message from the Citizens' Assembly saying, would I be interested in doing it online and did I know how to use Zoom? Oh, I knew how to use Zoom. So I said, yeah, I'll have a go.
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect actually.
The first one was a little bit, there was a few sort of technical issues for others.
It wasn't the same as meeting them face to face. But once we got into the swing of things, and into smaller breakout groups, conversations started to flow again.
Probably where we all felt most at home was when we were put into our breakout groups.
I enjoyed it, and I think everybody was way more reasonable than I expected.
I had a 4-week-old baby, so she was a little bit of a disruption on the first. I think she was introduced to 100 citizens. But look, that's all part of it, and it probably fed into the gender piece, around child-minded and care for children.
Citizen, of course, is central to the Assembly. They are being asked to inform themselves and then to give their views to their political representatives. So they were in charge of the process all the way through. My own role and that of the Secretariat was to help them make it happen, to present them with the facts, to structure the meetings, but it's their voice that matters.
We looked at the Constitution, Bunrock na HÉireann, written in 1937, written in a patriarchy, for a patriarchy.
We had the opportunity to really explore these issues in depth, to debate about them, to think about them, to look at some of the issues that are in the in-between, the grey area.
There were some things I did learn, but there was other things that people learned from me.
As the group progressed and we went through different topics, I come to see that it is actually a bigger issue than I originally imagined.
The more I learned about the topics, the more I felt the need for significant and long-lasting change.
I kind of would have considered myself a feminist, but certainly there has been an awful lot of perspectives that I may not have considered previously.
Until you walk in somebody else's shoes, it's very hard to know what's going on. The Citizens' Assembly is an essential idea. It's active citizenship. It's citizens taking responsibility for their country and saying, this is what we want, this is the society that we want.
It was a very, very positive and enlightening and encouraging experience, actually.
I felt kind of proud that I was representing the woman who was told to stay in the home and all this guff that we had to put up with.
I'm proud that I may have in some small way played a part in creating a brighter and more equitable future for my 3 daughters.
People who you've never met before come together, all being passionate about the one thing. It's really, really inspiring.
Restored a bit of faith in humanity.
The advice that we give is going to the Taoiseach. How many people get that opportunity in their lives?
I think what we will see coming out of this particular Citizens' Assembly is a very strong call for change. That is definitely the mood of our citizens.
There's a lot of things that need to be changed in this country, and I hope they feel that the recommendations that we give now are valid and reasonable, because we are the citizens and we have worked hard.
I think you can tell from that video that Assembly members enjoyed the whole process, but above all, that they worked very hard. Because instead of face-to-face meetings and chances to discuss the topics over meals as well as at round tables, the outbreak of COVID meant we had to take the whole Assembly online soon after we started work. And this meant sending out weekly homework videos and briefing notes for the citizens to watch at home, because we wanted to devote all the time at the meetings to debate between members. And I have to say how much I admire our members who stuck with us and knuckled down to a very different way of working. From the very first, they were committed. They listened and they learned, they deepened their awareness and thinking, and they engaged in serious debate in a respectful and inclusive manner. And we covered a lot of ground, as you will hear in a moment, when we present our recommendations. Everyone has their own personal experience of gender equality and of gender inequality. What the Assembly did was to provide neutral factual information on a huge range of topics. We were lucky to have had national and international experts speaking to us about their research, using Irish and international data to inform us. They showed us comparisons between the situation in Ireland and in other countries, as well as helping us to compare Ireland to the EU average. We heard from a wide variety of advocacy organisations who told us what they wanted the Assembly to consider in order to improve the lives of the people they represent. Most moving of all, we heard from brave people who shared their personal experiences with us and sometimes moved us to tears. Some of the information imparted by our speakers surprised our members, and as you heard in the video, strengthened their determination to come forward with bold and clear recommendations for change. And the recommendations don't just call for incremental change, they call for far-reaching changes that can make Ireland a better and more gender equal place for all of us. They call for change in our constitution, for new laws, and for stronger enforcement of legislation. Not only did COVID force us to move online, but it also shone a very bright spotlight on the relatively low value our society puts on care. COVID has highlighted the importance of high quality care when we need it, and we all need it at different points in our lives. So changing how we value care, properly providing for carers, and supporting choice and independence for people who need care are very strong recommendations coming from the Assembly. To put the very clear and focused recommendations of the Assembly into their wider context, the members have written an open letter to the Oireachtas. As you will hear now, in the voices of members of the Assembly, we see gender equality as a matter of human rights, justice, and fairness.
We are the members of the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality.
We were selected as a cross-section of Ireland's people
and are honoured to represent our fellow citizens in advising you on advancing a more gender equal Ireland for all.
We see our recommendations as successors to those of previous citizens' assemblies
that have helped transform Irish society to reflect how Irish people want to live their lives in the 21st century.
Undeterred by the COVID-19 pandemic and despite the challenges of moving online, we gathered in mutual respect and openness as we listened, learned, and reflected.
Our views on gender equality were deepened and at times challenged.
We looked back into Ireland's history, we looked at present-day society.
And we are now submitting to you a new view of a future Ireland where gender equality is the norm.
We have worked hard together to agree a set of recommendations,
which we believe could make a real difference to the everyday lives of everyone living in Ireland, young and old.
COVID-19 has highlighted a cultural shift in our attitudes to gender-based inequalities in Irish life.
It has magnified many shortcomings and gender inequalities which are no longer tolerable.
We want to see change now.
We believe our laws and policies need to be transformed to make them fit for the post-COVID world.
We ask that you bear the following in mind as you respond to our recommendations, and also as you develop laws and policies in the longer term.
Gender equality is a matter of human rights, justice and fairness.
It must underpin all of our interactions as a society.
The state has a special responsibility to treat all of its citizens equally, regardless of the gender identity.
In compliance with Article 40.1 of our Constitution, all citizens shall, as human persons, be held equal before the law.
While there are still many inequalities in women's lives that need to be eliminated,
we also recognise that gender inequalities are intensified by discrimination on other grounds.
Men also suffer inequality, lack of opportunity and discrimination.
Some of the prevailing gender norms and stereotypes are deeply destructive and adversely affect all genders.
Trans and non-binary people suffer from particular facets of inequality.
Advancing gender equality through implementing our recommendations can benefit the whole of Irish society,
regardless of gender identity.
We are recommending behavioural change so that all citizens are respected and valued.
Even pre-COVID-19, it was clear that we need to transform our models of care to ensure that our society values every person
and provides high quality care for all who need support at every life stage.
Post the pandemic, it is even more urgent to commit to a well-designed, publicly funded pay and career structure for carers,
whose invaluable work in the home and wider community contributes so much to the common good of society.
Ambitious, not incremental change is needed.
To ensure political, business, cultural and sporting institutions are more representative of Irish society.
In terms of gender balance and representation of minorities.
Without affirmative action to increase the number of women in representative office at national and local level,
change will be too slow, and we want to see change now.
Gender equality is vital for a sustainable and equitable economy.
It helps to reduce poverty and promotes economic growth.
At work, the gender pay gap must end, and we need a better work-life balance for the good of our families and our society.
Gender stereotyping and old gender norms must be eliminated, including through education.
Everyone must be supported in achieving their own potential, regardless of their gender identity.
Urgent legislative action is needed to hold technology and social media companies to account
for identifying and removing sexually violent or abusive content,
and to penalise and eliminate hateful and abusive language, including on the basis of gender.
There is no place in our society for gender-based violence.
We support the aspiration of the Istanbul Convention to create a Europe free from violence against women and all forms of domestic violence.
We want our government to work actively towards this goal.
Our recommendations call for better public services and improved social protection in order to advance gender equality.
These should be funded, firstly, through greater efficiency and accountability for public funding,
and reprioritisation between current spending and revenue raising.
If necessary, we are also prepared to support and pay higher taxes based on the principle of ability to pay to make a reality of our recommendations.
We have enjoyed our work in the Assembly and welcomed the opportunity to contribute our views.
Each of us have invested serious time and effort in our work,
conscious of the importance of the theme of gender equality in our own lives,
and for the healthy development of our society.
We urge you to match our commitment by accepting our recommendations and implementing them without delay to deliver gender equality for Ireland.
So there you have, in the voices of some of the members of the Assembly, a summary of the mood and the direction of the Assembly. You heard that members were honoured to be part of the Assembly, they enjoyed their work, and now they want to see action based on their recommendations. As you've just heard, the recommendations call for better public services and improved social protection. The members are well aware that their recommendations might require increased public funding. So they call for greater efficiency and reprioritisation of current spending. And 95% of them say they are prepared, if necessary, to support and pay higher taxes to make a reality of their recommendations. I'm now going to present some of the recommendations to you. From over 500 initial recommendations put forward by the members, 45 priority ones were finally adopted. And you can imagine there was a lot of debate and careful consideration went into the process of deciding on the final list. I think it is very important to stress that, members themselves shaped and created these recommendations. In fact, right up until the last weekend, where they proposed over 40 amendments to the recommendations on the ballot paper. And in many cases, the changes that they proposed made the recommendations stronger and clearer. The full text of the recommendations, together with the voting outcomes for each recommendation, are being made public now. Just before I comment on the detail, you will notice that the items I highlight received a high level of endorsement from our members. And this actually reflects the process that we followed. Members had multiple opportunities to shape the ballot paper, and then they voted on what items should finally go on the ballot paper. So the 45 recommendations that were adopted represent the highest priority items for the Assembly. And now I'm going to present to you, and you'll see on the screen, a sample of the recommendations adopted by the Assembly. You can now see that there are 3 recommendations to change the Constitution, all of which were carried by a large majority of members. As you can see, the first recommendation is about inserting a new clause in the Constitution to refer explicitly to gender equality and non-discrimination. such clauses already feature in more than 80 of the world's constitutions. The second recommendation is to delete the so-called woman in the home clause from the Constitution and to replace it by wording that would oblige the state to take reasonable measures to support care in the home and in the wider community. And the last one on this slide recommends extending the protection of the family, which is currently in the Constitution, to all families and not just the married family. Next slide, please. 96% of members voted to recommend that all elected representatives should be entitled to maternity leave. It's interesting to see that the Assembly voted in favour of gender quotas for extending them beyond general elections to all local, Seanad and European elections by the end of 2022. There was a somewhat lower vote, but still with 75% in favour, for increasing penalties for not respecting quotas. And as you can see here, 83% voted to recommend increasing the current gender threshold from 30 to 40% by the end of 2022. Next slide, please. We had further discussion about other quotas, and the Assembly is also recommending gender quotas of 40% on the boards of public bodies by the end of 2025. And also recommending legislation to require 40% of the boards of private companies to have at least 40% gender balance on their boards. The Assembly also voted for making public funding for culture, arts and sports organisations contingent on a 30% quota for women and men on their respective governing authorities by 2025, and that this should rise to 40% by 2030. And you might like to know, just as a reference, that the IRFU is currently at 8%, the GAA at 11%, and the FAI at 25%. Next slide, please. We're now looking at recommendations on childcare. Ireland currently has a largely private sector model of childcare. The Assembly voted by 96.7% to recommend moving to a publicly funded and regulated model over the next decade. It also voted to recommend increasing state funding for childcare from the current 0.37% of GDP to at least 1%, and this no later than 2030. The 1% figure is a UNICEF target for all UN members. You can see on the slide differences in the number of yes and no votes for the different components of the recommendations on parental leave, from a high of 83% in favour of granting parental leave for the full first year of a child's life, to a slightly lower level of 77.8% for making this kind of leave non-transferable. The aim of recommending that parental leave not be transferable between parents is to encourage greater take-up by both parents, as is also the recommendation for higher payments to encourage increased take-up of parental leave. Next slide, please. Now we're looking at some recommendations on care and looking after carers was a very strong theme of all the discussions of the Assembly. This slide covers several recommendations, all of which got over 90% of the votes. They include giving carers better pay and conditions, including access to pensions, and to a career structure that reflects their level of skill and training. There were also a high number of votes for giving older people and those with disabilities more choice in their care. Next slide, please. COVID has both highlighted and exacerbated domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, and the Assembly voted by over 90% to include the topic in the school curriculum. Also, to develop and train judges and lawyers on the treatment of victims and survivors, including on the exclusion of sexual history, character and medical records in court cases. And as you can see here too, the Assembly recommends the appointment of a Victims Survivors Commissioner to be an independent advocate and voice for victims and survivors. Next slide, please. Now we're looking at the area of pay and social protection. The first recommendation shows a 98% vote in favour of aligning the minimum wage, which is currently €10.20 an hour, to the living wage, which is currently £12.30 an hour, by the date of 2025. There was also very strong support, 94%, for legally binding targets to reduce the gender pay gap, which is currently 14.4%. And you can see here the recommendation is to reduce it to 9% by 2025 and to 4% by 2030, and to completely eliminate it by 2035. The Assembly also recommends moving to an individualised social protection system, which would mean that payments go to the person who needs them. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, we seem to be having a technical problem in moving to the next slide. There we go. Now we're looking at the area of media, social media and advertising. And as you can see here, there were very high levels of support, over 93% of the votes, for holding technology and social media companies to account for harmful and abusive online content. Also for making them report on how they comply with gender equality and inclusion measures. And there's an interesting recommendation that these companies should try to improve the visibility of men in caring roles. The aim here is to help move away from stereotypes of the kind of jobs women and men traditionally do. And finally, to ensure that what is recommended actually gets done, the Assembly voted by 93% for the creation of a statutory body for gender equality under the responsibility of a cabinet minister who would coordinate across government. And this is needed because there are several ministers and departments who are responsible for different aspects of gender equality. There was also strong support for better data gathering and for doing gender impact assessments and equality budgeting. The aim of these measures is to ensure that public policy is genuinely representative of the whole population. And as we have seen in the COVID crisis, many public bodies are still unbalanced in terms of gender representation. So you can find the full list of all of our recommendations on our website. And you can see that on the screen now. So that's the end of the slides. And it was just a short summary of what the members agreed. I'd encourage you, of course, to look at the full list of recommendations on our website, as there are many other important items that I didn't have time to cover today. I want to thank you again for being with us today. I want to thank the members of the Assembly for all their hard work and for the public service that they have rendered to their fellow citizens. I want particularly to thank our wonderful Secretariat, superbly and skillfully led by Dr. Mary Claire O'Sullivan. They have been absolutely fantastic, hardworking, good-humoured, ever creative, and delivering miracles time after time. It has been a real pleasure and a privilege to work with them. I also want to thank our expert advisory group, Professors Ursula Barry and John Gary, Drs. Gráinne Healy, Sandra Healy, Tom Hickey, Helen Russell and Emer Smith, for their unstinting work in helping us to develop a wealth of factual information in an accessible way, as well as helping us to find the best speakers and supporting the members in developing their recommendations. I'd like also to thank all of our presenters, our researchers, our meeting facilitators, the Department of the Taoiseach staff who helped with our technology, our audiovisual and communications providers, our e-voting providers and scrutineers who assured the integrity of our vote, and everyone else who worked so hard to make our work possible. So what happens next? We will be sending the open letter and the recommendations to the Oireachtas with a fuller report on the Assembly, and we'll do that by the end of June. Since this was Ireland's first online Citizens' Assembly, we will report on how we did it and on the views of members on that experience. We will also explain the rationale behind our recommendations, and we hope that the advocacy organisations that participated in the Assembly will support and argue for the recommendations adopted by the citizens. The changes called for by the Assembly will only happen if they are supported and implemented. Previous assemblies have shown that they were a true reflection of citizens' views and actually a better barometer than any opinion poll. And this should not be a surprise. The recommendations we are presenting today come out of more than a year's hard work and informed consideration by the members. As the members say in their open letter, they now urge the Oireachtas to match their commitment, and I quote, "by accepting our recommendations and implementing them without delay to deliver gender equality for Ireland." And so, in closing, I'd like to say what a privilege it has been, as well as a great experience for me to chair this Citizens' Assembly. I am so grateful to have been able to work with such wonderful people in such a good cause. Thank you for your attention.